everybody. Welcome to another episode of Start the Conversation. I'm Rochelle LeGrand here, your Miss Atlantic Shores. And today I'll be interviewing a very great friend of mine. Her name is Kayla Kim. Hi, Kayla.
Hi.
How are you?
Well, how are you?
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today, I should say. So Kayla is with us today, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about her background and her identity as a mixed race individual, and a little bit about her adoption as well. So Kayla, can you first tell me a little bit about you, where you live, where you graduated from?
Sure. So currently I'm in Jersey City, New Jersey, land of the Lenape. I graduated from Rutgers University in 2016. I was a triple major in theater, psych, and education as a social science. And then I went to London to get my master's in creative producing at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama.
Oh, that's amazing. 3 majors at Rutgers.
Yeah.
I survived doing 2. It was a rough time. Okay? It was a great time, but it was a rough time. The best and the worst of times.
Yeah, it was a lot of credits. I think I took like 20 credits this semester, and then I had to take summer classes and stuff too.
Oh, gosh. Oh, I was struggling with the 17 that one semester, but you did, and you did it again, so that's great.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you are adopted, but can you tell us a little bit about how and why your parents decided to adopt, and why they chose you?
So my adopted mother struggled to have kids, basically. So she was only able to have kids in one ovary, and what ended up happening was she tried to get like insemination in vitro, and basically the doctor kind of messed it up, and she basically was not allowed to have kids at all. So because of that, they started to look at other ways to have children, and one of them was adoption. And they met someone who knew Holt International, which is my adoption agency, and they reached out to them, and it was a long process. Holt, compared to other adoption agencies, is based on income. So it was very great to help those who are unable to like afford to go through the normal fees of adoption. So at the time that worked out really well for them, as well as from my side, my mom basically was a worker. Sorry, my cat. So my mom was a worker on this textile farm, and my birth father was the owner of the farm, basically textile. And basically he took care of her, and he was in his 70s. She was in her like 20s, as far as I'm aware of. And they had a relationship, and he was married to someone else. So in Korea during that time, if you're a single mother, you're looked down upon, you're not able to have a job. Your children want to be able to go to school and have a really great life. So because of that, she ended up giving me up for adoption. So she gave up her rights to Holt International, who then found my parents and then connected us over. So I came over when I was 4 months old to America.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. And that's so nice to hear. You know, I spoke with someone a couple of weeks ago, another pageant sister of mine, and she was explaining to me like how long and how hard the adoption process is for people. And especially she was saying for people who identify with the LGBT community, how much work that they have to go through just to, be approved to go through the adoption process. So I think that's really great to hear.
Yeah.
So can you tell us then what background it is that you identify with?
So I identify as a Korean adoptee. So part of my identity, which is why I identify as mixed, is because I biologically am Korean, but I was raised more like of Italian, Irish, American background.
Okay.
Yes, and it's when you're talking about the mixed experience is very broad in range. So you have people who are mixed race, those might have a mixed experience, such as myself as adoption or second generation or third generation, or it could be based on upbringing. So I know it's a bit different when it comes to when we talk about mixedness.
Yeah, I'll say myself, I always associated people who are mixed, just people who are mixed race. But it wasn't until I always knew you, but when you explained more about you and your background, I was like, oh, well, I understand how you can, like you said, mixed doesn't just include people who are mixed race, if people of mixed ethnicity, mixed background in terms of how they were raised and culturally. So I never knew that before, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching probably didn't know the same thing either. So then what was it like growing up in a family that looked racially different from you?
And when I was a child, I didn't really think anything of it. So like my parents talked about my adoption early on. So we knew it was very clear from the beginning, like, you're adopted, here's your story. They had little books and stuff like that, so we knew. It wasn't really until probably kindergarten, first grade that I realized that I racially was different than my parents. And the first time I realized that was I had a friend come over for like a play date, and basically she was like, "Why does your mom and dad not look like you?" And then it was kind of like this embarrassing thing of like, uh, "I'm adopted," and then it was kind of like, "But still, why are they not your real parents?" So it's always a struggle between loving being of what I call like being American and a Votapek, but also having to struggle with being racially different and how that might mean, and like going out like well, before COVID, it was my cousin's birthday. We went to medieval times, and when it came to me, I was like in the middle of the group. They were like, "Are you sure you're with this party?" Like, yeah, I'm part of the family, just because they look different. So it's not the real stereotypical what people would assume a family would be. So there are struggles and microaggressions with that, but I've learned to find a balance between my own identity within that. So part of the struggle of being mixed is having to hold both cultures, and being okay with being code switching, or being okay with finding a balance between what that means for you. So for me, being a Korean adoptee might be very different than someone else being a Korean adoptee.
Right. No, I definitely hear what you're saying, and thank you for sharing that. Something that you said that struck out to me. I I'm Haitian American. I look black. I am black, but I remember I grew up in a very white suburban neighborhood, and my whole life, if there was another black person, there was only one,
Mm-hmm.
and it was me and one other person, and they may not have been in the same class as me. They were in like 3 classes down the hallway, and I remember actually the first time I had like that realization that, oh wow, I'm not like everyone else. Yeah, we're all kids. We all like the same thing. Side note, but I remember, I do agree. I hear what you're saying. I remember having that same experience. That one time it really hit me that, oh, I'm not like everybody else around me. Of course, you see it, but when you realize other people are seeing it too, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and also within the Korean community, you get the opposite. So like I was never enough because of the history. So in Korea, they basically erase like any adoptee history because of the stigma. They believe that bloodlines are so important. So like I'd be called a banana, where I looked Asian, but inside they was considered white, or a Phasian, which is a fake Asian. So I've had individuals my whole entire life trying to teach me how to be Korean, and like they'll shove it down my throat in that one setting of like, this is all you have to do, and this is everything about it, and this is cultural stuff, and you're doing this wrong, or be offended because I said or did something that I wasn't aware of culturally.
Wow, I never heard of that before. But that is very similar. I was actually reading a play the other day. It hasn't been published, but it's new, and a director had approached me about it. And I find that a lot, that especially people who come from different backgrounds overseas, they'll find that they're never enough. They're too American for their culture, but then they're too, or you never know which exactly it is that you belong with. And that's why I really identified with the show. I said, I come to the Haitian Club. The first time I was around a group of people from the same nationality as me, I wasn't enough. Well, I was too American. Well, my Creole wasn't as good as it should be. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't identify with the black kids, and I can't identify with the Haitian kids. So where is it that I fit in? I mean, it's a completely different experience for you, but I see where, a lot of that overlaps as well.
Yeah, and that's why mixed experience is very broad, and that's something like people might disagree with me. A lot of individuals I've talked to believe that mix is only those who are biologically related. However, my point of view is based on experience and having this internal struggle of you have to find your identity within your own group and figure out what that might mean to you, and how do you feel comfortable within your own identity, and then how do you hold your identity in different spaces, because it changes. When I go home with my family, I'm a very different type of person than I am when I'm with my friends or theater people who are allow me to be more mixed and allow myself to identify in that way. Um, so it's learning those struggles. And as a theater artist, you're like, okay, how do I use this into my art? And how do I create art out of it?
Yeah. Now that you say that, have you ever found ways to incorporate a lot of your background in the art it is that you produce and create and perform?
Yeah, so when I was at Rutgers, I wrote a play about my experience. So it was really great to be able to share my story and get feedback from that. I'm also currently working with a group of amazing emerging and theater artists who identify as mixed, and we're currently in the process of creating our own affinity space and currently asking the community what they need and how can we support each other,
Right.
and opening it up to the broader conversation of not just those who are biologically mixed. So having how can we have this shared experience and support each other, but also find our own community within those groups too. So we're creating that, as well as I'm also working on this festival that will highlight different people's points of views. Because one of the things, particularly when we have mixed conversations, is you might find someone who's mixed or identifying the same way, but their experience is very different. So
Hmm.
how can we show the world the uniqueness of what that might mean, and not box us in like, okay, you're a Korean adoptee, so everyone Korean adoptee has the same exact experience. How
Yes.
can we showcase all the different experiences and be open to that?
Oh, I love that. I love that because I feel like once you meet one person who's a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
everyone that you associate with after, if they don't fit into that box, you start thinking that there's something wrong with them rather than saying, well, let's open up the box and let's see there are multiple different aspects of people with a similar identity. I think it's something that we forget. That's one of the reasons why I created this platform, is that I find that we keep putting each other in boxes and forgetting that, every box is different. Every person is different. We have different experiences and different backgrounds and cultures that, yeah, we may be similar, all come from the same place, but that doesn't mean our upbringing and who we become is going to be the same after that. So that's literally why I created this platform, so that we can showcase that a lot more.
Yes, and that's why I love and thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So did you, aside from what you told me about your birth parents, did you ever look into finding more about your birth family? I have a friend who's adopted, and that was something that she also told me she struggled with a lot with, was finding out. I mean, why your parents decided to put you into adoption, but I had a friend of mine who really struggled with deciding whether or not she wanted to do that.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because I've got asked that a lot. So growing up, I kind of didn't really care because I always believed like my adoptive family was my family.
Mhm.
But because of COVID, I've been learning or wanting to know more about my medical history. So a lot of people are like, you might be like have these things that you might want to be careful of, and I don't know any of that. Like I can't tell you anything about my medical history. And because of that, and because I've been doing a lot more my own identity search of what it means to be Korean for me, I started actually doing the birth parent search. So I'm in the process of that. So that's how I got more information about my birth parents, is through the American paperwork. But because of COVID and because of everything, I'm waiting on my Korean paperwork to see if I can get approved to find out who my birth parents are.
Okay, that's wonderful. That was what I was going to ask you next, because that's what she told me. She actually spoke to, I don't remember the story exactly. She'll kill me if she's watching this. The fact that she had gone to a group of lawmakers and said that people should be allowed, I mean, it's everyone's personal choice whether they want to know, but that these records should not be sealed, because that can help you when you're finding out medical information and things that you'll need to know, especially if one day you choose to decide to have children. There's a lot of information that you may not have known about your medical history beforehand, so that those records should always be available and everyone should have access to them, and then they'll decide whether or not they want to go through with that. But it could really help save you in a lot of trouble and a lot of things that, that could really save your life in the meantime.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly because like the paperwork I have now is like, oh, good health. That's it. Cried when she was a baby. Like it's not really that helpful.
Not helpful at all. Exactly. Right. Okay. Well, speaking that you spoke a little bit about some of the ways that you experienced microaggressions that did make it hard for you to also, find your identity. What are some things that you think people who are watching this can do to be better allies and really just be more open-minded to people who have mixed identities as well?
So the first thing is, don't assume someone who what they look like identifies what they like what you might think. So a lot of individuals will look at me and be like, "Where are you from?" Assuming that I will only identify as an Asian, like or Korean. So I basically being open and allowing opportunity to learn and not be so closed-minded and thinking like, oh, that person might like because it physically look like that, that's what I should assume. Because a lot of times it's different. Sometimes it's upbringing, sometimes it's religious things, sometimes it's having mixed parents. It could be multiple different ways that forces someone to identify or allow someone to identify in different ways. So being open to that and not automatically putting people in those boxes.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you so much for joining us, Kayla.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for just being very open about your experience and really offering a lot of things for us that we could do just to be better humans and better people to one another. So thank you again so much, and it was great having you, and I hope to see you again soon, maybe one day in person. Thank you.
Yes, it'd be great. We can get coffee or tea or something.
Of course. All right, well, thank you again so much, and I hope you have a good one. Bye.
Bye.